Warsaw, April 23, 1943. From outside of the city's Jewish ghetto, Poles can hear gunfire and see flames rising through the apartments beyond the wall. It's the fifth day of an uprising in the ghetto, an uprising that has surprised the Poles and shocked the Nazi officers charged with cleansing Warsaw of its remaining Jews. Inside the ghetto, hiding in a subterranean bunker at number 18 Mila Street, the 24-year-old military commander of the Jewish fighting organization, Mordecai Anilevich, scribbles a note to a friend. "Things have surpassed our boldest dreams," he writes. "The Germans ran away from the ghetto twice." But Anilevich is realistic. "I can't describe to you the conditions in which the Jews are living," he continues. "Only a few individuals will hold out. All the rest will be killed, sooner or later." The battle is a complete mismatch. 2,000 heavily armed German soldiers against 700 untrained Jewish teenagers armed only with pistols and gasoline bombs. Yet this lopsided struggle will last 28 days as a condemned people shakes off despair and embraces defiance in the simple hope of dying with dignity. It will go down in history as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the most stirring episode of armed resistance in Nazi-occupied Europe, and an example to future generations of unyielding heroism and courage. The final testament of Mordecai Anilevich is a letter sent earlier in the uprising to his deputy, Yitzhak Zuckerman. Anilevich wrote, "Peace go with you, my friend. Perhaps we shall meet again. The main thing is the dream of my life has come true. Self-defense in the ghetto and Jewish armed resistance have become a reality. I have lived to see the magnificent heroism of Jewish fighters in battle." But the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was just part of the fabric of Jewish resistance.
We know today of 63 places where there were resistance groups. We know of roughly 20,000 Jews who fought in the forests. So this is not an isolated case, you see. Wherever they had the opportunity, and in some places where they didn't have the opportunity, they fought.
To live with honor and die with honor, it was their message to us all. They gave their lives for our freedom. Through pain and agony, fought for humanity. We'll keep their memory.
Welcome to my first video on this channel, One Israel News. It's 14 March, and this is video number 1 on anti-Semitism. So, I'm not a professional, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a professor, I'm just a Jew. And I've decided to do this video, or series of videos I'm going to start, as a learning experience for myself and for others who watch it, to explore anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the Holocaust, and the state of Israel, and how we got to where we're at. The Warsaw Uprising started almost 80 years ago on 19 April 1943. It lasted for about a month. They weren't expected to last more than a few days. You heard him say over 700 Jews fought against over 2,000 Nazi troops. They were bombed out, burned out, hunted into the basement, flamethrowers into the sewers, bombed out of the sewers. Men, women, and children fought in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The vast majority of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, I believe it's close to 200,000, maybe even 300,000, had already been removed the previous summer. And there just remained maybe 20,000, 30,000 that were left in the ghetto to work. The Germans had planned to liquidate the ghetto eventually as the Russian troops approached Warsaw. So the Jews that fought there, they knew that one way or another they weren't getting out of there. They're all going to die. And when you're faced with a decision like that no matter what choices you make, you're going to die. The only thing, you can't control that you're not going to die. You can't control maybe how you die. But I guess you can control how you die. You can either take your own life or you can die fighting. And unlike the last 3 or 4 years, where Jews were marched off to the death camps and into the gas chambers, these Jews knew they're going to die and decided to fight on their terms. So I have a lot of respect and a very special place in my heart for the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Because unlike the other Jews who fought in the forest and fought in the resistance, these Jews knew they weren't going to escape, and they chose they could have just put up their hands and said, hey, take me to the gas chambers. But they chose to die on their own terms and die with dignity. But I want to take a step back from this and talk about the subject of this video series is anti-Semitism. And how did we get to this point 80 years ago? It's not like anti-Semitism came from outer space riding on a meteor and crashed into Europe, and all of a sudden the Germans and other people in Europe became anti-Semitic and started murdering Jews. There's a long, long history of anti-Semitism that got us to the point of the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were killed. And the apex of that Holocaust, I believe, was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. That was one of the major points where we decided we just weren't going to take it We weren't going to take it lying down or with our hands, naked, our hands up, naked in the showers, being gassed with rat poison. We knew we were going to die. We were going to die on our own terms. And this is what they did. But the long history of anti-Semitism is how we got here. And this is what I want to talk about. Unfortunately, things come around again, and we've got another wave of anti-Semitism occurring right now in the U.S. in the last few years. So I always like to start off with definitions and to define it, because if you can define something, you can understand it, and then you know what to do about it. Okay? You have to name it, give it a name, and it becomes real. You can't just pretend it's not there. So to define something, I want to look at definitions, and this is what we're going to do. And so from this point on, we're going to move forward on defining anti-Semitism, and then we're going to get into the timeline, going all the way back to the beginning, with Moses and maybe even Abraham. I'd say mostly Moses. And then come forward in time, and we're going to see that the Holocaust, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, wasn't something that was in an isolated, out of the blue thing. It was something that built up over thousands of years. All right.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
The suspect in today's mass shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh had an extensive anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish digital footprint.
It's talking about all these Jews need to die.
On the last day of Passover, bloodshed in the middle of Shabbat services.
We believe that the suspects held views that reflected hatred of the Jewish people.
Violent attacks against Jews are on the rise. In the U.S., anti-Semitic incidents are at the highest levels in 40 years and have more than doubled in the past 10. These attacks all have a common root: anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism means prejudice against or hatred of Jews, and it can take many forms. The Holocaust, during which Nazis and their collaborators murdered 6 million Jews, is the worst example of anti-Semitism in history. But it also exists in daily life. A popular meme depicts a man, meant to be Jewish, with exaggerated, grotesque features. A social media influencer makes a joke about the Holocaust, or does a Nazi salute in a video shared with millions of followers. Hateful hashtags trend on Instagram. School buildings are defaced with swastikas. Someone argues that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. These are all expressions of anti-Semitism that can become dangerous if left unchallenged. Sometimes, anti-Semitism doesn't sound like hatred. It might even sound complimentary. For example, believing that all Jews are good with money can open the door to more overtly anti-Semitic beliefs, such as all Jews are greedy. When repeated over and over and not questioned, stereotypes can be accepted as truth, and that can eventually lead to biases and hatred of an entire group. The Holocaust began with words, not killing. And while there's no direct connection between sharing a meme and violent attacks, when left unchecked, anti-Semitism creeps into all aspects of society and starts chipping away at democratic values. The more you hear or see anti-Semitism in your social media feed or casual conversations, the more accustomed or numb you become to hateful and dangerous beliefs and behavior, which is why it's important to never ignore it, overlook it, or accept it.
So I wanted to go back and take a look at some of these symbols that they had here. So let's take a look at these guys.
Jews will not
you see these are all young men. They're not old people here. They're no 50-year-olds. These are 20, 25-year-old young, very angry men. And you got to wonder, if you think about it, it's 2023. Most of these guys in this march, this is Charlottesville, were born around the time of 9/11 or maybe right before 9/11. And I'm not making excuses for them, but as China rises and their jobs, the jobs are shipped overseas to China, we've seen this massive rise in white neo-Nazism, whether it's the Proud Boys, whether it's these other, the Boogaloo Boys, whatever they're called. They're all Nazis. And especially since the election of President Trump, who calls himself a white nationalist, all his people he hangs out were all white nationalists. I don't care if he's got, a son-in-law that's Jewish and his daughter is converted to Judaism and it says he supports Israel. When you have a massive rise of anti-Semitism and neo-Nazism encouraged by the election of a president who calls himself a white nationalist, then we have a lot of problems here. Again, it's very disturbing. Usually the way things work is that each generation gets a little, hopefully better, nicer, more understanding. At least that's the way I understood it when I was growing up in the 80s. But it seems like we've gone in reverse. We've turned the ship around somehow. We went from the civil rights movement, desegregation, civil rights legislation, the assassination of Martin Luther King, and then normalization of, people having the right to do what they want to do and work where they want to work and live where they want to live, up to like the 90s. And now we've had this reversal. And it's very disturbing. That's one reason I'm doing this video. And I did want to say also, let me take a look at this here. These memes. Now, I've done a whole series back in 2021, about 100 plus videos on the QAnon movement and its origins and its relationship to anti-Semitism and the Nazi movement, and how the whole QAnon movement, it was just basically sprung out of that just absolute complete hate, racism that's boiling underneath America, especially among young white males like we just saw there. This is an image that I saw constantly spread amongst the QAnon believers. And this all, basically started in 2017 when Trump became president. All right, so we'll keep going on with our definitions. Now we're going to get into an exact definition of anti-Semitism. It says, anti-Semitism is hostility to or prejudice against the Jewish people. To go further here, it says, hold on one second. And again, the reason I'm doing these definitions is because, like I said, you can't fight something, you can't change people's minds unless you have a definition of what you're looking at. And then you know where to go from there. Okay? So, we'll use the example of white nationalism and the MAGAs and the Trumps, okay? When you look at them and the majority of the people who are involved in that, you see their definitions and how they, how they're running their business, I guess you could say. Rampant nationalism, xenophobia against anyone that's not white, anyone that's not American. And, this all started, we've seen this before back in when we had a wave of immigrants back before World War II, after World War II. the high point of the Southern Klan started in the 1920s, and it was all against, supposedly Jewish communists and Catholics and, foreigners coming to take over the country. Anyway, so it says here, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jews or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, today toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. I have noticed, because I was involved in countering this QAnon, that it's almost exclusively, almost all of the anti-Semitism is exclusively young white males. And a lot of that has to do with many factors. A misperception of understanding of Jews, because Jews only make up 2% at most of the American population. And there's not, there's not a lot of interaction between young white males and Jews. And so when you have people that grow up in what they perceived as someone holding them down, holding them back, they don't have the same opportunities their parents had, they develop a lot of hate, and then they focus that hate on one of the groups that they think is responsible for that. And this is why you see a lot of hate towards George Soros and all these other things related to that. All right, so we'll keep going and trying to define what we're talking about here.
Threat, even if it's more physically violent and threatening, it's clear. Meaning, no one disputes when someone walks into a synagogue and says, all Jews must die.
Yeah.
There's no debate about what that is. That's anti-Semitism, plain and simple. But when someone says, I believe in BDS and I believe in it for these reasons, it's less morally clear for people.
Yep.
So take the example of, the Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who were supposed to take this trip to Israel. They called it Palestine in their agenda, their official agenda for the trip. The trip was sponsored by a Palestinian group called Miftah. Now, if you go and look at the website of this group, Miftah, it sounds really great. It talks about advocating for Palestinian rights and for human rights of people all over the world. But then you look a little deeper, and Miftah glorifies suicide bombers, and Miftah has literally published the medieval blood libel against the Jews. It has published a piece saying that the Jews need the blood of Christian babies for Passover. Somehow, that did not become a national news story. The fact that that was the group sponsoring them.
Their trip, yeah.
To me, if you think about if Steve King was going to take a trip and meet with a far-right group in Sweden or Norway, there's no question that would make headlines, and rightly so. Yet somehow, when the threat comes from the far left, we overlook it. And
it's a shame you don't know anybody at the New York Times to tell them what they should have been reporting on, right?
Well, I do my best.
Did you have a conversation about that at the time?
Yes, and I also got myself on CNN so I could, have 45 seconds to talk about it.
Right.
But I'm only one person. I can do my part. I think part of the problem is, and this is, I think, one of the reasons that people are really, really hesitant to talk about the threat from radical Islam in European societies. And it's for a very good reason, actually. It's for the reason that a lot of times, for example, Muslims in Europe, they're experiencing their own systemic discrimination and oppression and xenophobia. And God forbid, in criticizing them, we would add to that burden. I think the same is true with someone like Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar is subjected to disgusting, bigoted attacks from lots of people, not least the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world. So when that is the case, it makes criticizing her ideas that much harder, because you don't want to add to that.
Right.
You don't want to take part
but
in
your
this
mind,
toxic
she's no
discourse.
less deserving of having those views, her views, taken seriously and criticized where necessary.
In my view of the world, Ilhan Omar should be criticized for her ideas, not for her identity. And the problem is that we have a president that denigrates people based on their immutable characteristics and their identity.
Right.
We should be criticizing voraciously people based on the ideas that they hold.
So, I just want to mention something that she brought up. I haven't watched this. I didn't know she was going to bring that up. That, these ideas of hate have always been around. You know, it's not just anti-Semitism. It's, you know, anti-Islam, xenophobia against immigrants, hatred of gays, and we're seeing this trend for hatred of gays and persecution of gays and trans and lesbians nowadays. All these things are all tied together. The same people that are attacking Jews with their anti-Semitic hate are also going out there and attacking Muslims, attacking immigrants, attacking trans, attacking gays and lesbians. Okay? It doesn't stop at anti-Semitism. You know, it's like this poem or this thing that was put out there that, you know, first they came for the Jews, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't Jewish, and then they came for the Muslims, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't Muslims. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I wouldn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the socialists, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for me, and I didn't say anything. Well, there was no one left to say anything to protect me. And so what I'm saying is, as a Jew, I'm not just standing up just for my rights and fighting against hate just against Jews. When we fight anti-Semitism, we're fighting the same people who are anti-immigrant, racist against blacks, racist against Muslims, you know, have hate for trans, and, you know, have hate for gays and lesbians. The same people that are going after us are going after all these other groups, all minorities, okay? And so when we stick together and fight all these things when they come about, not just, okay, well, I'm Jewish, I'm not gay, or I'm you know, I don't agree with homosexuality, or I don't agree with Islam, so I'm not going to defend them, but I'm just going to defend me because I'm Jewish, and hopefully everyone will defend me. You know, well, you know, it's a two-way street. If I don't stand up for the rights of Muslims not to be persecuted in the United States, not to be targeted as all being terrorists, you know, when I don't stand up against the banning of people to live their life the way they want and dress the way they want, even if I don't agree with it, okay, I think it's kind of, personally, to tell you the truth, I don't understand why a man would want to dress like a woman, but hey, that's not my choice, okay? That's their personal choice. Some people, I'll put it to you this way, some people may not understand why if I had a child, a male child, would want to snip off the end, you know, of their foreskin on their penis as a sign of a covenant with God. Some people wouldn't understand that, but that's my religious choice, okay? I'm not forcing that on anyone else, nothing like that. Some people wouldn't understand why I would support, okay, them building a Muslim mosque near Ground Zero in Manhattan, close to where the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened. Because not all Muslims, or the majority of Muslims, were not involved in the attacks there. You know, there's over 1 billion Muslims in the world, and we're talking just a few thousand people involved in Al-Qaeda. Okay? So, what I'm trying to say is, when you fight against anti-Semitism, you have to fight against xenophobia, fight against anti-immigration rhetoric, fight against the Nazis, fight against racism, fight against, you know, legislation that's just being practiced, you know, against gays and lesbians. You know, and the thing that really bothers me about this whole trans thing, the anti-trans legislation, they're normalizing. You know, you got a governor who's in Tennessee, who's normalizing, and you got elected officials that are normalizing hate for a person and calling all trans and all gays, you know, child predators and molesters. You know, when the vast majority of molestations and sexual abuse of children nowadays occurs from heterosexual males in their family, not some stranger reading them a book dressed like a woman at a library, okay? That's the fact. So this is what I'm saying, and it's been exasperated by Trump from the last 4 or 5 years, you know, by QAnon, the QAnon movement, by this white nationalist rise movement that's risen up over because they got air to breathe because of Trump. Okay, this group's always existed. They've always been on the fringe. You know, KKK membership out of 300 million people is only what 10-20,000 at the most. You know, so they never were even close to even being any kind of majority, minority, whatever in the public view of thinking. But there was always that simmering group below them of sympathizers who said, hey, you know, I just can't, you know, support you guys because I'll lose my job or I'll lose friends. And so when Trump came along, he gave oxygen to these people. That, oh, it's okay. You know, you even hear him say it. It's okay to be white. You know, it's okay. When they're saying it's okay to be white, no one's stopping them from being white. What's happening is they're saying it's okay to be a white nationalist racist is what they're saying. So again, this in America, there's always been anti-Semitism. There's always been this xenophobia and racism with these white nationalists. You know, and what bothers me about the whole white nationalist thing is that it's kind of a cleansed, safe word for a fucking racist. Racist, bigot, Nazi Klan members. That's what they are. Okay? Excuse my language, but anyway. So, again, I just want to emphasize that when you fight against anti-Semitism, you're not just fighting against anti-Semitism. You're fighting against xenophobia, racism, anti-immigration, you know, hate. You're fighting against all forms of hate because they're all connected. Because the same people that are hating Jews are hating all these other groups. Okay? They're attacking all these other groups. You know, the guy who went into the El Paso Walmart could have easily gone into, you know, a synagogue in Dallas. It just depends on who he was hating that day. The guy who went into a supermarket and near Buffalo and gunned down and murdered, you know, 10, 15 African Americans, and he purposely targeted that point of town because of the large African American population, okay, could have easily gone into a synagogue in Pittsburgh, just a couple hours away, and killed Jews. So it's all related, it's all tied. We're all being attacked by the same group of people. Okay? It's not in isolation. There's not, oh, well, you know, thank God I'm, you know, Hispanic, because then the Nazis won't come after me because they're just going after Jews. No, they're going to come after you too. Okay? So we're all in this boat, lifeboat, floating, trying to survive from just unbelievable amounts of hate that's going on in America and the world. And there's a whole reason for it. It goes all the way back. Okay? And again, we're going to get into this more and focus more on anti-Semitism. But again, it's if you think that you can stand in the corner and say, well, it just happened at a synagogue, so I'm not Jewish, so why should I care? Or, oh, it just happened at a Walmart, and it's just a bunch of Mexicans who are probably illegal anyway, so why should I care? You know, someday they're going to come for you, and there's not going to be anyone else to stand up for you. Anyway, enough of my ranting. We'll keep going.
Returned. But what is anti-Semitism? And why should its return be cause for grave concern, not only for Jews, but for all of us? Historically, anti-Semitism has been hard to define because it expresses itself in such contradictory ways. Before the Holocaust, Jews were hated because they were poor and because they were rich, because they were communists and because they were capitalists, because they kept to themselves and because they infiltrated everywhere, because they clung to ancient religious beliefs, and because they were rootless cosmopolitans who believed nothing. So what is anti-Semitism? Let's be clear, not liking people because they're different isn't anti-Semitism, it's xenophobia. Criticizing Israel isn't anti-Semitism, it's part of the democratic process, and Israel is a democracy. Anti-Semitism is something much more dangerous. It means persecuting Jews and denying them the right to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as everyone else. It's a prejudice that, like a virus, has survived over time by mutating. So in the Middle Ages, Jews were persecuted because of their religion. In the 19th and 20th centuries, they were reviled because of their race. Today, Jews are attacked because of the existence of their nation-state, Israel. Denying Israel's right to exist is the new anti-Semitism. And just as anti-Semitism has mutated, so has its legitimation. Each time, as the persecution descended into barbarity, the persecutors reached for the highest form of justification available. In the Middle Ages, it was religion. In post-Enlightenment Europe, it was science, the so-called scientific study of race. Today, it's human rights. Whenever you hear human rights invoked to deny Israel's right to exist, you are hearing the new anti-Semitism. So, why has it returned? There are many reasons, but one root cause is the cognitive failure called scapegoating. When bad things happen to a group, its members can ask one of two questions: what did we do wrong? Or who did this to us? The entire fate of the group will depend on which it chooses. If it asks, what did we do wrong? It has begun the process of healing the harm. But if instead it asks, who did this to us? It's defined itself as a victim. It will then seek a scapegoat to blame for all its problems. Classically, this has been the Jews, because for 1,000 years they were the most conspicuous non-Christian minority in Europe, and today, because Israel is the most conspicuous non-Muslim country in the Middle East. The argument is always the same. We are innocent, therefore they are guilty. Therefore, if we are to be free, they, the Jews or the State of Israel, must be destroyed. That is how the great evils begin. Why then should we all care about this? After all, if we're not Jewish, what has it got to do with us?
Exactly.
The answer is that anti-Semitism is about the inability of a group to make space for difference. And because we're all different, the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews.
That's right.
It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Hitler. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Stalin. It isn't Jews alone who suffer under the radical Islamists and others who deny Israel's right to exist. Anti-Semitism is the world's most reliable early warning sign of a major threat to freedom, humanity, and the dignity of difference. It matters to all of us, which is why we must fight it together.
Wow, I didn't watch that before, but that guy did a lot better job than I did of explaining it, how anti-Semitism is just like the first step to all these other hate, because the people that are hating Jews are hating all the other groups. And I'll give you two examples. Just recently, just a few days ago, in Germany, I don't know the complete details, but some guy, some hateful person, went into a church in Germany and killed, I believe, 15 Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses, why would someone kill Jehovah's Witnesses? 15 Jehovah's Witnesses. They're pacifists, you know, but let's not forget that Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany, the same time the Holocaust was going on, were being sent to the gas chamber also, along with the Jews. Okay? They refused to fight, and therefore they were considered not patriotic, and therefore not deserving of their life. And so they were sent to the gas chamber along with the Jews. Another example of hate is, I believe about, 12 years ago in Norway. A neo-Nazi, self-styled neo-Nazi who learned all his hate online, created or manufactured his own bomb, somehow got a hold of a police uniform and some rifles, and went out to an island where they were having a summer retreat for the children of the Democratic Socialists who are the majority of the government in Norway, and killed, I can't remember exactly how many, but 20, 30 children, and terrorized the rest. And they were stuck on that island, and he made it where they couldn't leave, and he went around and killed them all, and he was taken alive. And his reasoning was that the socialist government was the one that was bringing in all these foreigners into Norway and diluting the white race in Norway. Specifically, he was talking about Muslims. And you think, well, why didn't you just go kill Muslims? Well, again, you have to think about how these people think. Is that if you killed the Muslims, they're just going to bring more Muslims in. But if you kill the future leadership, which is what these children are, they're the children of the leaders of the Democratic Socialist Party. Most likely, some of these would end up in the government 10, 15, 20 years from now. So his reasoning was you kill off that generation of Democratic Socialist children, you kill off that ideology. That's how far his hate went, is to kill children, 13, 12, 14, 15-year-old children, so they wouldn't grow up to be, caring Democratic Socialists that care about other people. That was his reasoning. That's how far his hate went. And again, there's no reason why he couldn't have, if things were different, could have gone into a synagogue in Oslo and gunned down a bunch of Jews. It's the same group of people that are attacking Jews are attacking everyone else, like I said. And if we don't fight it together, and if we look at it and just try to say, oh, it's just anti-immigration, well, I'm against all these immigrants coming to America anyway, or it's anti-Mexicans, well, they're all a bunch of illegals anyway, or it's anti-trans or anti-gays, well, that's a sin according to the Bible because I'm Orthodox or whatever, and I don't support, why would men want to dress like women? Because the same group of people that are attacking all these other people are coming after Jews also. So we either stand together and fight anti-Semitism, and therefore once you start fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism and anti-Zionism, you end up fighting the same people that are causing all the racist attacks and all the spreading of hate that's out there today. Anyway, enough of my lecturing there. All right, so we're getting into some more definitions here. And let's see. So it says a working definition of anti-Semitism. The working definition of anti-Semitism, also called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, is a non-legal binding statement on what anti-Semitism is, which was adopted by the IHRA plenary, consistent of representatives from 31 countries. Wow, only 31 countries. In Bucharest, Romania, on 26 May 2016, the statement reads, "Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards the Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities." Now, all right, so being a Jew in America is a blessing, I have to say, because as a Jew, especially as a white Jew, I can blend in. I can fit in. Okay? I can be as Jewish as I want, but I can also hide and blend in and not stand out. If I was African American, Asian, Hispanic, because of the race there, I wouldn't have that privilege, that luck, I guess you could say. But saying that, having said that, I still face, and many Jews still face, anti-Semitism in the United States. We're targeted at our synagogues, we're targeted at our jobs. You know, there's Orthodox that go around with the kippah on. I never wear a kippah outside of synagogue because I don't want to be targeted. I used to be very vocal about being a Jew, but, you know, I've gotten burnt. I've learned. And anti-Semitism in America is a lot more subtle than just blatant racism, because you don't know for sure. Did you not get that job? Are you not hanging out with those people because you mentioned that you were Jewish? You know, it's much more subtle. It's much more hard to define. You can't really put a finger on it. Okay? So, I've probably been subjected to more anti-Semitism than I actually acknowledge, because one thing about Jews in America is that we don't want to acknowledge that there's as much anti-Semitism is going on as there really is. We want to say, no, we're fitting in, we're just like everybody else, and no, just because I didn't get that job doesn't mean because I didn't get it because I was a Jew. Or just because these people don't want to hang out with me, it's not because I'm a Jew. But then we have to realize, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and realize that a lot of times, not all the time, because we don't want to get into a paranoid, rant that everybody is out to get us, but we have to recognize it for what it is when it happens, and for what exactly is going on there. Now, I've had blatant things happen, like I mentioned that I lived in Israel and I was Jewish, and things were going well in the interview, and then all of a sudden, you get this email, this standard email that says, we've decided to go with another more qualified candidate, even though they were right at the edge of, hiring you right then. So I never mention that I'm Jewish, and I rarely mention that I've lived in Israel. Thank God I work at home now. I don't have to put up with that. But I have had to deal with violence in the United States directed towards Jews. Right after 9/11, about a year after 9/11, there was a group of Muslims who tried to get into Afghanistan. This is in Portland. That couldn't get into Afghanistan through China, and so they came back to the United States. Thank God the FBI was watching them, because they had informants that were telling these guys had gone off and tried to get into China, so they were bugging them, and then they had planned to strap explosives to themselves, go in with guns into my synagogue, shoot as many Jews as possible, and blow themselves up and set the place on fire, or set the place on fire, then blow themselves up. And one day, I went to synagogue, and there were police all around surrounding the synagogue, armored vehicles, men with machine guns, helmets and tactical vests all around the synagogue. And I didn't know what was going on. We got into this, they let us in, the rabbi was there, he said, yeah, you can come on in. And he told us, a member of the FBI came up and told us what was going on, that these guys had threatened to come in and kill us just because we were Jews. Now, these guys were Muslims, but do I hate all Muslims because of that incident? No. Just like I wouldn't hate all white guys or white people because, or Protestants or whatever, because some idiot Nazi went in and gunned down a bunch of Jews, and he just happened to be, a white Protestant. So I don't hate Muslims for what a few Muslims did. Okay? And when I was in Israel, came across many incidents of violent anti-Semitism. Just happened to be lucky. A few feet forward, I would have been probably dead. Who knows? One day I'm in Jerusalem in August 2008, walking up King David Street, up past the YMCA and the King David Hotel, and I hear some metal crunching and screeching, and I hear a bunch of noise, and I keep going up King David Street as the road rises up above, and I see this tractor smashing into a bus. And this tractor had ridden over a car and crushed the car, and I could see that the people were in the car were probably dead. And this taxi driver, I don't know why I kept walking forward, because I was drawn to it, I guess. I could have ran off the other direction. But I came up to these trees, and I was hiding behind the trees and kind of looking around the side, because there's nothing I could do. I couldn't stop this guy in a big bulldozer tractor smashing into the side of this bus. He was trying to kill Jews, okay? It was that simple, okay? A cab driver came up, got out. He had a little .22 and started firing, and the bullets were bouncing off the metal cage on, inside the tractor, but it didn't hit him. And I'm sitting there dodging behind the tree to not get hit by the ricochet. And then, a few seconds after that, this two men in black helmets and black jackets carrying machine guns, riding a black motorcycle, comes flying up this King David Street. One man jumps off. He's a soldier. It's probably special forces. Runs up to the tractor and just unloads out of his full clip into the cab where that Palestinian was there. And he was flying around like a rag doll. The whole interior of the cab turned red. And I'm just sitting here shell-shocked, not knowing what to do. Should I run? Should I have morbid curiosity and be a witness? But I just stood there and held on to this palm tree that was right to my left. And this memory is ingrained in my head. It'll never go away. It's always with me. I can close my eyes any day and see it. I can see the blood inside the cab shooting all over the place as the bullets flew through. And then the other, soldier unloaded his weapon into an obviously dead Palestinian. But when the Palestinian died, he fell forward, and the weight of his body pushed onto the gas, and the tractor kept running into the bus as people were trying to get out. And so one of the soldiers ran up, pulled his pistol, and climbed up the side of the ladder and shot some more, and to make sure the guy was dead, and then opened the cab and turned the tractor off. And then within seconds, it seemed like there were police, military everywhere. And so what this was a guy a Palestinian from East Jerusalem, who was given papers to work in, was background checked, everything, trusted, whose family basically, I read the story, was approached, and he was approached and told that, hey, if you, by a terrorist group like Hamas, that if you carry out this, we'll take care of your family, we'll make sure they don't have to suffer or anything like that, and they'll get a paycheck every month. So he did it to take care of his family, because there's a deep-rooted anti-Semitic hatred that's going on in the Palestinian territories, from the children on up. Another incident, this is before then, same year though, a friend of mine, before I moved to Israel, we went and visited, rented a car, and we drove. He was Christian, so I wanted to drive over to this Garden of Gethsemane. There's some kind of Russian church over there. We drove, and we missed the turn, and we came up behind there's a big Jewish cemetery there. We came up behind that and went up a dead-end road to turn around. But before we could turn around at the dead end, the whole area was completely saturated with a bunch of 8, 9, 10-year-old children, Palestinians, riding bikes. And they surrounded our car, and they threw their bikes in front, and they were pounding on the car, because in Israel they have yellow license plates and on the back of the car, so they knew that we were Jews, or at least from Israel, okay? In the Palestinian areas, they're white tags. So they're pounding on the car, and you could see I was just completely freaked out. My friend was freaking out, screaming. And we're grown men. We're like 39 years old. We're not children, okay? As these children, 8, 9 years old, are pounding on our car and had looks of murder in their eyes, that all I could say is that they were definitely brainwashed into a lot of anti-Semitic hate just because we were Jews, or they perceived that we were Jews. My friend wasn't a Jew, he was a Christian. So I honked my horn and I revved my engine and told them to get out of the way. There was no way to get past them. And there was 2 of them on the hood. And I looked up the hill, and I could see them pointing, and I could hear shouting. I looked behind us up the hill, and there were older teenagers, 19, 20-year-olds, coming down the hill with guns. And I knew what they were going to do. They're going to kidnap us, hold us for ransom, whatever. So I wasn't going to allow that to happen, so I gunned it. I hit one of the kids. He flew off the hood, and we got out of there. And the whole back end of our car lit up with rocks, and we had 1 or 2 bullet holes that I had to pay for to repair the car. And that was, Jews in America, there's over 5 million Jews in America, and we say, we're safe, And Jews in Israel, they say, now that we have a state, we're safe. But we're really not safe anywhere. We could get killed in America. We could get killed in our own country in Israel. And what made it even worse is 2 days later, I'm over at Masada with my friend, and we had ridden the cable car up, and we toured around, and I was with this girl who eventually became my girlfriend, and we were touring up there, and I noticed there was this group of young children. They had darker skin. They were obviously Israeli Arab, okay, or Muslim children. Again, the same age as those kids that tried to take my car, or tried to take our car, 8, 9 years old. And So we're going to take the snake path, which is a back path down the back of Masada, down to the parking lot. Unfortunately, these kids decided to do the same thing, and they were marching ahead, and they were singing in Arabic or whatever. And they had a guard who saw that we were trying to get past them. And so he told all the kids to go over to the left, which would have been the downhill side, and let these people pass. And my friend, even though he was a Christian, was wearing this big, huge Star of David necklace that he had bought and was sticking out through his shirt. And he was walking ahead, and when they saw that, these kids, they all picked up rocks and started tapping them on other rocks as we were walking by. And I didn't know a lot of Hebrew, but I knew what Yehudi meant. It meant Jews. So they're banging these rocks as we passed by. 8, 9-year-old children full of hate, shouting, Yehudi, 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 like that. And then they were saying something else in Arabic, which I assume wasn't good. And I'd already had this traumatic effect. I didn't realize that I had a form of PTSD from this attack 2 days before up behind the Jewish cemetery there from this other Arab group. And now we have these children full of hate, not knowing what the hell they're saying, not knowing the effects of what they're doing to us. You know, it reminded me of that movie, Schindler's List, when the Jews are being marched off to the camps, and the Polish Christian children are screaming at the crowd as they're marched by and guarded by the Germans, saying, "Goodbye, Jews, goodbye, Jews." And I was just full of a lot of anger and rage. Just because I was a Jew, these people were hating me. These children were hating me. And that was one of my experiences, you know. And I've had a couple other things that happen, but maybe I'll get into those later. But I'm going to end the video now because I've been ranting for about an hour. But when we come back, we're going to keep going down this and getting into more anti-Semitism. And eventually we're going to get into the timeline. And I guess the main point of this video is in the beginning is to emphasize that we're not alone. If you think that you can ignore anti-Semitism and you can ignore when Jews and Israelis are attacked and killed and it's not ever going to come back and affect you, you're living in a dream world. Because once they're finished with us, do you think that Hitler, once he finished with the Jews, he wasn't going to come after others? So, anti-Semitism is hate towards Jews, but anti-Semitism is just the tip of the iceberg of hate for all people, all groups. And we need to discuss it, we need to link it, we need to fight it and join hands and fight it together. Because we're not going to win this battle fighting it by ourselves. 5 million Jews in the U.S. is not going to defeat anti-Semitism in the U.S. fighting by themselves. We have to join together because we're all under attack. We're either going to, survive this together or we're all going to hang together. Anyway, until next time, take care.